welcome to our webinar today on how you can deliver policy management using SharePoint. I'm joined today with our Head of Consulting and Delivery, Ben. Good afternoon, Ben.
Hi, Rupert. Thank you.
Hi. Right, Ben, so you're the expert on all the detail in this, but let's dive into it and let's get into policy management for SharePoint.
Fantastic.
So, Ben, who should be watching this and what are they going to get out of it?
Yeah, no, thanks, Rupert. So really this is for, we've got a few people on here. So I think the first is, you may be a CIO or IT director and you may have been considering or asked by, maybe your head of quality or governance about how can approach policy management using SharePoint. People have invested in SharePoint already as part of Microsoft 365. How can they use the tools they already have to achieve this? Alternatively, you may be a SharePoint administrator or expert, and you're looking some ideas and concepts on how you manage this process. So key takeaways from today is we're going to run through what we think of as the sort of 7-step process for how we manage policies, and you can see how you can actually achieve that using SharePoint and the associated tools such as Power Automate within Microsoft 365.
Perfect. Okay, so there's something for everybody here. Right, so without further ado, Ben, I think you touched on there the 7-step process for policy management. Why don't we run through that first, and then that's going to help us shape the rest of the webinar.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I'll just run through this. So step 1 is about creating these policies or these documents, and we want to do it in a standardized way so there's consistency. We're going to be using templates. We're going to be making use of the collaborative capability within SharePoint to support that, but also we're going to introduce things like unique numbering. So, as part of things like ISO requirements, documents need to have a unique reference. How can we achieve that? And then, of course, because again, we're in SharePoint, we've got that benefit of things like version control and how we can manage that process.
Okay, Ben. Now, I've got approve here, but I know somewhere between creation and approval, there is going to be a bit of consultation as well. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll cover that as well in the demo. So when we're going to the point where we need to issue that document, say it's gone through a consultation, we need to issue it for approval. We're going to be looking at using the Power Automate capability within Microsoft 365 to do things like workflow and assign approvals to people. But one of the key things we need, which doesn't necessarily come out of the box, and we've kind of introduced, is this idea of being able to have an audit of the workflow actions and the approval actions that are taking place. So we can show you how we achieve that as well.
Got you.
So we've approved our policies, which is great. We now need to publish them and make them available to people. So this might include things like converting them into a PDF to make them available for end users. We might want to push this as a news story or make it available on a page for new joiners, for instance. Of course, we want to be able to search for them using the SharePoint search capability. And now, as we're seeing more and more, there's interest in how can we actually start tapping into AI to maybe ask questions about it using things like Copilot or perhaps a tool built on Azure OpenAI, as we'll see today.
Okay, so this is where policies and internet start coming together. So that's an interesting one. Right, let's go a bit more formal.
So certain policies may have a regulatory requirement that means that, as part of whether it's a, ISO 27001, for instance, we need everyone within a certain group of the organization to have acknowledged that they have read and understood this policy. This is sometimes referred to as attestation, so we can look at how we might be able to achieve that.
Perfect. Okay. And it's just a question's already popped up. Yes, we will share the slides or make them downloadable afterwards. That's absolutely fine. Okay, Ben, so on to feedback.
Yeah, so it's all very well pushing these policies out, but there are scenarios where sometimes policies need to be updated, or maybe there's an issue with the policy, or perhaps it's a regulatory change, for instance. So creating a mechanism where users can actually feed back about those policies and the right owner is notified is really quite crucial.
Okay.
And then finally, often with policy management, and as we can see, this is a life cycle, so these policies will need to be reviewed and refreshed. We often see things like a 2-year life cycle might be assigned to certain types of policies, so we need to be aware of which policies are approaching their review date and making sure that that's actually being issued out to those owners, so that we don't have to be chasing those people to get it reviewed. And again, you know, in some cases it could be off the back of a life cycle, or it could actually just be the feedback has been raised, I need to review that feedback and make a change right now.
Okay, perfect. So there's been a change in the environment or something like that, which has triggered that change, not just a period of time or a lapse of time. And then
Exactly.
the last piece, Ben, number 7.
So this is about monitoring. So let's say I'm a head of compliance and I'm responsible, or accountable, I should say, for all of these different policies and procedures within our organization. Or let's say that I'm going through an ISO audit, for instance. Having a central place where I can go and get that all up bird's eye view of everything that's going on. I might want to see my overdue policies, maybe even things like orphan policies, i.e. documents where the owner of that document has left the organization and I need to be aware of it. And of course, I may have some KPIs about, you know, how many documents have been acknowledged, how many overdue policies we have that I need to keep an eye on.
Perfect. Okay, so that's a slide. Ben, let's dive into this and see how we can make this real.
Yep, sounds good. So we're going to start with the step 1 of the process, as you'd expect, which is creation. So I think what we'll do, Rupert, if you don't mind, it's worth jumping into our demo environment and we'll go and run through it.
Perfect. So here we go. I'm in our demo intranet.
So just very quickly, I think because we are working within SharePoint, generally a policy hub may be part of a wider SharePoint intranet. So we've come to effectively our SharePoint intranet page. This is not a webinar about intranets, obviously, but as we can see, there's a common set of things like news, links to tools, and a common navigation. But we're just going to jump into the policies area from the top nav.
Gotcha.
Okay, so with our policy solution that we're kind of working through today as part of a demo, we're realistically making this a very search-driven experience. So we want people to be able to come here and search for things. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a bit. For the moment, though, I need to be creating policies. So if you hover under the Policy Hub Administration link, it's just worth calling out. So we've got a couple of libraries on the left-hand side. We've got our document masters and we've got our published policies. So we've made an active decision to separate out the draft working versions of policies from the published policies. Rupert, if you jump into the published policies a second, we can see that within here, these published policies are actually in PDF format. You can see from that PDF icon, apart from a template there. Whereas if we jump back to the document masters, or jump to the document masters area, which is where we're going to be working now, these documents are actually all in their native format, such as Word or PowerPoint, etc. So there's a few decisions around that. One, the fact that we can actually convert them to PDF when we're publishing them, because, you know, rightly or wrongly, people have this perception that if something is PDF'd, then it's kind of finalized. And then the other thing is that if I'm an owner or a drafter of policies, it is useful for me to be able to see those actual published documents separate from the ones I'm working on. Now, SharePoint does have this idea of major and minor versions, but we've just found in our experience that if I'm a policy owner, it's easier to have that clear separation, which is why we take this approach. Perfect. So what we're going to do now, we're going to create this document. So Rupert, could you click on the new button, please? And what we can see, we've actually preset a load of templates here. And one of the ones that we're going to be working on today is a HR policy template. So if you could click on that. Perfect.
And so, Ben, if people have their own templates, I'm assuming they can upload them into SharePoint. Is that right?
Yeah, so they can upload into SharePoint. The other thing that some users will use is the organizational asset library, which is where you can create a central hub of templates that are available to everyone within the SharePoint space. But in this case, it's easier to just have those templates loaded into the correct library. First thing we're going to do, Rupert, is if you can click on the document heading at the top, we're just going to call this annual leave policy, I think. Okay, that's great. Now, to be honest with you, I find this Word Online experience okay. It's fine for reviewing. It's not great for drafting. So I think realistically, we're going to jump into the desktop version of Word now. So if you click on editing, open in desktop, we're going to go and take over and go into there.
Okay,
so it's going to
that's
pop
just
up in a sec.
loading up behind the scenes. And here it is.
Okie dokie. Good, so we've already renamed the policy. We don't need to do anything else, but we are going to put in this policy title. So if you can click into the title, we're using something called a quick part here, which is where you can bring metadata in or out of a document and sync that up to SharePoint. We can see how that's coming through for things like the reference and the issue date, etc., and we'll see that a bit later. Now, just for the moment, we're going to sort of maybe put in a very quick, cheeky little Copilot demo as well. So we can actually start drafting our policy. We're just going to get Copilot to do this section for us. So we can see we're just getting Copilot to create a brief purpose statement for our policy based on annual leave. We can look at that and do some refinement on that as we need to do so, but I think that's good enough for us. Now, obviously, you go through and you do further editing, etc. But I think that's fine for the demo. So let's just come out of this policy, Rupert, if you don't mind.
Okay. And I'll
Okay.
close this too.
Yeah, we'll just shut that down as well. So what we'll see, if you have a little scroll down, we should see that annual leave policy has already appeared within the annual leave, within the HR section of our document masters area, but we've got a bit more information we're going to go and fill in. So if you could click into it, we're going to go open the details pane. Okay, so that's great. So if we have a look at what we've got here, so we've got the file name. The title has already been populated for us. So that was actually populated when we updated the document within the quick part. The policy has actually, or the type, sorry, has actually come through from the template. Yeah, the type's come through the template. The department has also come through from the template as well, because we saved that. But there's a couple of other bits that we are going to fill in. So we're going to set an owner. Now, the question is, what do we need an owner for? What's the benefit of having an owner, other than the responsibility of editing the document? But in this case, the key thing is when this document is going to be due for review in a couple of years' time, anyone that we set as the owner is going to receive an email because we've got an automated process that can send out emails to owners. And the other thing is if we feedback on a document, again, the owners are going to get notified. We can add multiple owners. So if you just add yourself as well, Rupert, it's great. That's fine. And then finally, we're just going to put in a few keywords. There's some other metadata in there, but we don't need to worry about that. But we're going to add in some keywords. So okay, we're using managed. Yeah, go ahead, Rupert. Yeah.
So it's an HR policy, and it's about leave, and it's certainly something I want to be put in my employee handbook. So I'm going to apply that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're using managed metadata for this. Now we can add in additional terms if we want. We've already set up a set of organized terms, so that's kind of good for us. And the purpose of doing this is it's going to make it easier for users to find and filter their documents at a later date.
Perfect.
Okay.
No, something's happened, Ben, here, because I
something's happened.
Document number. Yeah.
That's right. So the other thing that is just worth calling attention to here is this idea of a document number. Now, document numbering is generally something that, again, might be a requirement as part of ISO, where documents need to have a unique reference number. What we can see from this is that we have a unique number that's made up of a prefix, i.e. XP in our case. It's recognized it's a HR document, so it's put that HR prefix in there. It's recognized it's a policy, so it's got the P prefix in there. And then it's added in an incremental number. Now, the way we're doing this is using Power Automate. We're not going to demonstrate that today, but the way that this works is that we've effectively just teed up the next number, and Power Automate is going to run anytime a new document is going to be created. It will go and check the current number, grab that number, and assign it to the document. It is perfectly reasonable for you to just go and manually enter this in. This is a demonstration of what Power Automate can do, but absolutely, you know, some users may just go and actually manually enter in that number and maintain it themselves.
Okay, so the advantage of Power Automate is it's going to make sure that is a unique number, and it's going to follow that sequence, follows business rules. Otherwise, you're potentially doing that yourself. Okay. And then Ben, I noticed we haven't got a next, I think this is next review date here. That's what we're seeing. So I'm guessing that's because we haven't had our first review yet. So we don't know when that next review is going to be.
And it's a brand new policy, so we haven't even published it yet. Yeah, exactly. Now, just one thing before we move on, it's just worth bringing up this concept around consultation. So this is something that we see in the case of policy management sometimes, is where a group of users within an organization need to be consulted before it actually goes through a formal approval stage. Now, what we're going to use here is actually just the sort of straightforward out of the box sharing within SharePoint to do that. So if we click on the share button, let's say I've got a group of users, or maybe just a few users. We're just going to use some individuals for the moment. I can share that with them. And what we can see when we drop down is we've got a few different sharing settings. I could just click edit and let them edit it themselves. Or because this is a Word document specifically, I can use the can review. So what this is going to allow users to do is add comments to a document within Word, but not actually be able to change the body of it. So this is really useful if you want to get some feedback during that early drafting stage, but without people actually editing the document itself. You could have used, of course, because this is SharePoint, you could have, of course, used version history to track that, or even just simply enable track changes. But we find this can review is actually quite a powerful mechanism to allow people to do an element of feedback without changing the body. Now, we're not going to go through that for the moment, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that works well when it's going out to multiple people and you want to remain, you know, the policy to remain as it is and look at the comments before you actually start implementing those changes. So that makes a lot of sense. Ben, feels like that we've covered everything in creation. Anything else you want to touch on?
No, that's good. Let's do a summary.
Okay. So summary. So look, we talked about templates. Now, some organizations we work with, you've already put a lot of work into your policies, and so you don't need to start from scratch in SharePoint. And absolutely, as you've used SharePoint before, you can drag documents in, you can move them from other SharePoint sites, maybe you've already created. The advantage of templates is that anything new comes with that pre-baked format. And as you'll see later, that some of those fields which are embedded in the document will get updated automatically as part of the review and publishing process. We then looked at tagging and categorizing. So that's using managed metadata. So that is a SharePoint feature, which you can then use and drive some consistency around documents and how they're tagged and ultimately how they're going to be served up when you get to search. We then added unique reference numbers. As I said, we did it using Power Automate. There are other approaches to that. And then we showed you that feature within SharePoint, which allows you to send a document out for consultation or for review where people can only add comments, but they can't actually change the document text itself. So that's a super user feature which appears in Word. Now, Ben, we've created this document. We've done our consultation. Next stage, I want to send it out for approval.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at that. So let's jump back into our demo environment.
Okay.
So realistically, what we're going to be introducing, we've already kind of talked about this concept of Power Automate, which is the sort of workflow platform within Microsoft 365. And what we're going to start doing now is looking at this a little bit more deeply to handle some of this approval. So if you can just select that document a minute, please, Rupert, that we've got. First of all, what we're going to do is just click on those three dots. So I'm going to hover over the Automate option there a sec. And we can see we've got this option to submit for approval. So if you could just click on that. It's going to take a few seconds to load. And we find this experience is a little bit slow. So we can see actually what we're going to see in a minute is that we've created our own kind of mechanism for this. But conceptually speaking, I would create a Power Automate that is going to be initiated based on an individual selecting a file. I can allow a user to enter in an email address. So this will validate that it's an email address. The one problem with this, though, is that it doesn't actually put in any sort of business rules. You'd have to build that into the flow itself. So actually, Rupert, if you just cancel that a moment, what we're actually going to do instead is if you click on the drop down, we've actually created a sort of our own mechanism here. And this is something that's well within the capability of a sort of SharePoint developer, I would say, to be able to create a slightly more bespoke form that captures that information. So first thing we can see here is that we can see it's telling us what process it's going to go through. It's going to do a first approval, and then it's going to do a publish. Typically with approvals, generally they will go through a two-stage approval process. So they will go through a stage with a subject matter expert, And then they would go to something like a head of compliance or head of quality and then be published. Excuse me. So the next thing we've done is if you click on the approval dropdown, we've pre-filtered who it is that we actually want people to be able to choose from. And this can be filtered based on the department. You don't need to create.
I can see I've got some names here, Ben. So we've taken this document, it's an HR document, and we've defined that Ben, Amelia, or Chloe are the person or people who need to approve this. So what I like about this over Power Automate is I'm doing that validation up front, not behind the scenes. So if I'm going to send it to you, Amelia, for example, I'm guessing we can put business rules at this case, whether both Ben and Amelia should sign it or just first past the post, one of them can sign it. And so by doing that, we've got that more flexibility. But as Ben was saying, yes, you do need to have that sort of developer experience to do this. But with that investment becomes a richer user experience. So Ben, I'm going to fire that off, and I think that's going to fire an email off behind the scenes, isn't it? Perfect. Okay, so that has been sent for approval. Now, in this scenario, obviously I've sent it to myself. I'm acting as a user of Ben to help swap between screens and bouncing backwards and forwards. So we're going to give that a second, and then hopefully that will ping into my email. So let's bring up my email here. So nothing yet, but we'll give that a second to come through, Ben. Okay, so why that's thinking, I don't just highlight on the three benefits there of what we did with that process. The first one being that the form that the developed form, shall we say, loaded much more quickly. Secondly, we're able to add narrative of why that was helpful and useful, and guide people in experience and free way to validate the information. The other things that you can do if you're developing those forms is maybe have multiple actions within a single pane. So do I want to send this for approval, or do I just want to straight publish it, for example? So here we go. The emails come in. And Ben, what am I looking at here?
Thanks, Rupert. So what we can see here is this workflow is kicked off and it's assigned an approval to ourselves. And actually, the thing that's really useful is the email, or the approval has actually been sent via email, which is where still people are working daily. It will also come to Microsoft Teams if you're working within there. We don't need to worry about that today. We can see that there's some instructions. If I click on the link, or if you click on the link, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That's going to go and pop open a filtered view of those policies, so I can actually see, and I can go and click into it if I want to. I can do some drafting and editing, etc. We don't need to worry about that right now. So if we go back to our email, and then we can see that we've actually got these options of what we want to do, and it's given some instructions of what we need to do there, but we're just going to click inside the approve button, and then we can put in some comments. Perfect. We're just going to submit that.
And so I've done this all within the email. I didn't need to open a web browser. And actually, Ben, I've noticed that it's actually updated the email.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So it means if I come back to this email, A, I've got the record of when I did it, and B, I know that I've actually done it, and I haven't to go back into the system saying, did I do that or didn't I do that? So that's super helpful.
Exactly.
Okay, I've had a ping there. So I've had a notification. Obviously, I've sent it to myself, so it's a bit going around in circles. But the fact is, normally these would be separate people, and I've also got that comment that's come back there. So in this case, we put a one-step approval process, Ben. So I'm feeling that actually this process from a approver's perspective is now finished, and hopefully that's being pushed into our published policies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll just give it another minute or two. I think before we go and take a look at that, it might just be worth having a look at the audit log that we talked about before. So Rupert, if you can jump into the SharePoint site itself, and we can see that there's an audit link over on the right-hand side there. So if you go and click on this audit link, what this is going to do is show us a sequence of events that have happened for that document. So we can see there are three things. First of all, someone submitted it for approval.
Yep.
Next, it was assigned to someone. It was assigned and issued to this individual. And then finally, it was given to someone who then approved it and did that approval action. Now, as we go through this process, and let's say this goes through, you know, a cycle of a year down the line, we'll be able to see that sequence of steps from the very beginning of the life cycle of that document.
That's handy. And so we've got 5 approvers. We're going to get an entry for each of those when they get round to approving it, for example. I'm pretty sure that's a bit extreme, but you've got the record. And this is something that we've added into the workflow to provide that next level of auditability. So that looks good, Ben. Why don't I summarize what we've seen there, and then we'll see about documents being published.
Sounds good.
Okay. So that was the approval piece. So the first thing we looked at assigning and the fact that consider who it's going to and the business rules around that. Then those people are going to have to approve it, whether it's one person or multiple people, or maybe you're sending it to multiple people, but only the first person needs to sign it. Then the next step in our process is that we convert to PDF. Now we'd put a business rule on saying, look, if it is a PowerPoint template or a Word template, you probably don't want to convert those because you probably want people to use those as forms to complete once they're published. So we can put some flexibility around there. And then the last piece is the audit. So creating that track record of everything which happened. So when it comes to that review that audit by an external party, you can show them the data saying, look, this is what happened when, and I've got the evidence to prove it. So that's pretty cool, Ben. So fingers crossed, hopefully that document's now published into our policy area. So should we go and find it?
Yeah, let's go and have a look.
Okay. So I'm here.
So yeah, as we said, what we're going to do, we're going to jump over to the published policies area, which is where we'll expect, we can do that from here. Maybe just go into the, okay, that's fine. So because there's a few other things going on. If you click into documents.
Okay. Now I created annual leave under HR. Oh, and it's by magic. We've got that new icon in the little corner there, so I know it's new.
Yep, it's a PDF format. We can see all the metadatas come through. And actually, if you just click into that document itself, let's go and have a look at it. So we can see actually there's the text that Rupert entered in, or should I say Copilot entered in. But also at the top, we're using these quick parts. So actually the document reference number has come through automatically, the approved by, the approved date. That metadata has been populated automatically and put into the body of that document. As I say, we're using quick parts within Word, and when we go through and approve and publish, that information is coming through.
That's nice. And now in fact it's turned into a PDF. It feels like to me it's baked in there. So that's a good record of what's happened. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to close that. Now I know it's there, but often the employees, my staff, there's policies which I've created, or as we've created an organization that are not aware of. So I'm thinking about how can I get them out there and how can I publish them for people who are looking to find, who aren't aware of a policy maybe we've just introduced.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few ways that we can achieve this, and this is really where the benefit that we are within SharePoint, potentially within the context of a wider intranet. So the first thing we can do is actually potentially create a news story that we might publish out to our user base. So if you click on the intranet homepage there a minute, and we'll see we've actually got a policy we've published earlier. So if we click on that, so we can see here we've got this SharePoint news article page, which has put a bit of an intro, maybe a little bit of a briefing and a highlight about the policy that we want to send out to our users. And then we've been able to embed that actual policy directly into the news article, so people can go and review it directly within the news article themselves, or potentially upload it, etc. So technically we're using something called the file and media web part to do that. But it's a really nice way of bringing that document into the policy and then issuing it out to people. The next thing we might do is, let's say we've got a set of new joiners and we want them to be aware of certain types of documents and information, including certain policies. We can actually put that within our intranet navigation. So if you hover down into the people area, I'll go to new starters. Again, so we've got a page here which gives users an overview of some of the things they might want to need, vision and values, etc., etc. But also we've got this dynamic filtered view of documents and policies that they need to be aware of. we're not copying them. We're not having to create manual links to these policies. It is just automatically coming through. And again, for those slightly more technical people, we're using something called the highlighted content web part to do that. We've created this web part on the screen and we've filtered it to pick through things that might say leave or new starters, for instance.
Okay, and I can see this is live because we've literally just created this policy, and because it's tagged by one of our keywords, it's already appeared in this page. I haven't had to go through and update this page as an editor. And the other
Why
thing
don't you
is,
click on it and see? Let's prove it.
and the other thing is we've got this single version of the truth. So we're not copying these documents. We're still referring to the source document. And there you go. If you're watching this live, that is today's date. Looking good, Ben. So that's about finding policies maybe which I want, as an administrator or as an owner, I want me to be people to aware of. But what about the other side where I'm an employee? I know there's a policy out there. I want to go and find it.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is in a lot of cases, people don't spend their time browsing for policies, but actually often you will just want to search and find because you've got a specific question. So traditionally, we'd be looking at something like SharePoint search. So let's do a search for leave, for instance. So we can see all of the policies that have come through. Now we're technically using something called the patterns and practices modern search components to bring this type of search experience in. This is a free set of components that is available for people to use. And the nice thing is it brings us this kind of filter experience so we can go and narrow down and see what we're doing and see the various different tags. So this is quite a nice behavior to be able to do an initial search and then do some filtering to narrow down what it is that we want to do. Reality though, what we're seeing nowadays is more and more people, they're talking about AI, particularly things like Microsoft Copilot or other related tools. And actually what people want to do, they just want to be able to ask a question and get a response. So what we've done is we've actually created our own. I'm not going to underestimate, this is quite an exercise to do this, to give you a flavor of this. And this is the kind of thing that will be coming to Copilot very, very soon. Is I can just simply ask a question. So Rupert, maybe if you just ask our policy bot what the process is for requesting flexible working.
Okay,
So let's see what that comes back with. Perfect. So again, this is this kind of experience that we're seeing. People may be familiar with this, things like ChatGPT already. So what it's done is it's found the flexible working policy, but it's actually read inside that document and summarized that response for me and given me this nice sort of cohesive answer. It's even given me some potential suggested follow-up questions that I may want to look into, if I had a few more sort of queries about it. So this is just a flavor of where you can go. As I said, this is Microsoft Copilot brings in this type of capability as well. We've taken a slightly more integrated process into our sort of policy framework here, but it just gives you a flavor of where things are going.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm loving that. I also like the fact that I'm referencing the document, so I can go and get that next level of detail, because obviously this is AI. I want to go and see the actual policy. I can click on that. It's going to take me into that.
Right.
Or I can ask more questions. Right, Ben, I think that covers what I might call findability. So let me just cover what we've just talked about there as a quick refresher. So we talked about policies that we want people to be aware of, and that's through news articles or through the navigation and creating pages, evergreen pages, where that content can be served up and curated. On the other side, we've got the employee who's looking to find a policy, and either they're going to use the filters to drill down. And I know that speaking to some of our clients, they will group those documents together, maybe based on a process or a part of the organization, which they're trying to find that document, particularly if there's lots of documents with similar names. And then we're seeing more and more AI search. So the advantage that brings, if you're searching for vacation and use the word annual leave, AI is going to know that that's essentially the same thing. So although you might not get a match in a filtered search, you would get a match in an AI search. So each of these things brings different things to the table. Now, Ben, that's kind of solves the findability side, but obviously there's going to be scenarios maybe with a employee handbook where it's more than just serving it up, but you actually want people to say, yes, I've understood this and read this. So can we do that?
Yes, absolutely. So what we're going to show, if you jump into our demo environment, we're going to reference this. So as I said, this is a kind of scenario perhaps where there's a regulatory requirement that you need people to acknowledge that they've read a document. So what we're going to do first of all is go and issue a document for acknowledgement. Could you go into our publish policies area, please, from the navigation?
Yeah, so I suppose you wouldn't want to issue a document in progress. You want to issue one which has been signed off, so that makes sense.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Because this is about what the end user needs to look at. So if we go and take that annual leave policy that we've just gone and issued, again, so just to set some expectations around this, this again is using Power Automate to go and look at, sorry, this is using Power Automate to go and issue a document to a user or group of users or set of users. So if you go and click into that and maybe add, the sales team, for instance. So what's going to happen is that the Power Automate process is going to read inside that sales team members group, and it's going to create a record in a SharePoint list for every single user, because often it's not actually who has acknowledged that you care about, it's who hasn't, because they're the ones that you need to go and follow up and maybe chase. Now, we created a slightly more customized interface on top of that for the same reasons we said earlier. But if you're building this yourself in Power Automate, absolutely you can do that using the sort of standard capability.
Okay.
This will take a little while to run behind the scenes. So what we're going to do is see some acknowledgements that we've issued already. So if you go back to our homepage a minute, please. What we're going to do now is load up our acknowledged documents app. So the approach that we've taken with this is that we've created a Microsoft Power App. So Power App is related to Power Automate, part of that Power Platform for citizen developers to build these types of solutions. We are looking at a SharePoint list of all of the acknowledgements that have been signed to me as a user. I can click through one of those policies and look at them and see what's coming through. And we're using the sort of PDF viewer here to be able to bring that PDF through and show it, because it's quite useful to actually see that experience in line, allow the user to read it, and then tick and acknowledge to say that it's confirmed. Now, maybe if you refresh the screen, Rupert, we might have just seen that new one just come through. As I say, sometimes it's take a couple of minutes. So yeah, so we can see that annual leave policies come through. We know it's definitely the right policy. We can see that issued date. We'll have a scan through that. And again, let's just go and acknowledge that one as well.
Perfect. Okay, Ben, that was useful. And then we'll come on to reporting actually at the towards the end of the session. So I'm just going to run through what you talked about there. Obviously, before you issue a policy, there needs to be for attestation, there needs to be some awareness of what it is, why it is. There might be some education. You might be creating videos in Microsoft Stream, for example, to do that. When you do issue a policy for approval, then when you do issue a policy of attestation, you need to think about taking a copy of that document at that point in time. Because if something happens down the line, you want to make sure you know which version of that policy that person signed. If it's a version 3 out there, now signed version 2, then you need to be aware of that. So there's this idea of capturing the version which was signed. And then, yes, that acknowledgement process. Obviously, we built a Power App because we have SharePoint developers on our team. You might find that you're using more of a lightweight approach to that. But that's how we've done it to look at acknowledgement. Not every document goes through this process, but I'm sure there are certain documents which will need to. Now, Ben,
I mean, some customers may use an e-signature process, for instance, which is equally valid.
Yeah, just outside of this, but they can reference those documents back to SharePoint. Now, the next piece, obviously, this policy is out there. Somebody wants to give feedback on it because maybe either the environment's changed, there's an error in the document. What's the best way to give feedback, Ben?
So we're using a similar concept, actually. So let's just go back into the environment and demonstrate that. So could you just refresh your page a second? Yeah, that's actually come through anyway, but we'll just to be sure. So within our annual leave policy that's come through, we may want to publish some feedback or give some feedback on it. Okay, so we've actually put a give feedback link onto the search experience here. And similar to the acknowledgement functionality, we're using a Power App to achieve the same thing. So again, we're using this PDF viewer to bring that information through. but we've tied this to a SharePoint list, which means that we can create things like different columns and different drop-down values. So maybe you just click on the feedback type again, Rupert. We can see some of those different options, you know, clarification, business change. Maybe it was someone who isn't conforming to a standard. We want people to be made aware of this. So we're building this using a SharePoint list, and we've put our Power App on top of it. But it's a really nice way of being able to show the document to the user and allow them to submit some feedback in line. So why don't you just submit that? Once you've submitted it, it may be that you've got multiple pieces of feedback that you want to raise. So I could do multiple things at the same time. We don't need to worry about that right now, but it just gives you that sort of idea of how you can approach it.
Okay, so let me close that down. Now, obviously, feedback is available to everybody, but then those who receive it, that's going to be a different audience, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. So we talked earlier about the sort of significance of having the owners assigned to the document. When you submit some feedback, really it's the owners that need to be aware of it. And there's a few ways that you can achieve this, but what we've done is, first of all, the owner will receive a notification, but also, there we go. So that's actually come through straight away. So we can see that feedback's come through. They've actually got a link to the original draft version, the master document, as well as the published version. But also, if you just go back into the policies list a minute there, Rupert, if you click on our reporting a second and go to my feedback, again, we've just created a filtered view where an owner can see any feedback that's been assigned to them.
Perfect. So and in this case, it's against multiple documents, but the common thing about all of these documents is I am one of the owners. So that's why that's important. Okay, perfect. And then Ben, I'm guessing if I'm an administrator of a system, I can see all feedback regardless of the owner.
That's right, exactly. So this is using some permissions in SharePoint lists, etc., to kind of manage this. But yeah, absolutely. If you're an owner, you get to see everything.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think that's super useful on feedback, and we will look at those overall reports towards the end. So feedback, obviously different types of feedback. Some might be drive a full, republishing of a policy. Some might just need a response to the individual saying, actually, no, it is correct as it stands. There's a couple of things that what happens when we deliver that feedback is, firstly, the owner is going to get alerted via an email. But secondly, we're saving it in the SharePoint list. So even if you've lost the email, you can always go back into the system. And then from a quality management perspective, you've got this overarching view. So you can make sure that those people who are receiving feedback are acting upon it. So you've got your governance checks and balances there. Now, talking about the checks and balances and putting the review in place, Ben, let's dive onto the review process, which almost completes the circle.
Good stuff. So let's just jump into the demo environment again. Okay, so I think what we'll do, just before we do anything else, let's just go into the document masters area a minute.
Okay.
So the thing we need to sort of call out here, maybe when this loads up, if we just scroll down to where we had that annual leave policy that we created. When we took this document through the approval process, what we can see is that a next review date has been automatically assigned to this document. And because of part of our process, we've automatically assigned this as a next review date a year down the line. We can see below that, though, there's a policy, disciplinary policy, that is already overdue, actually. So the key thing around this is that when you do your publishing, you need to make sure that you're setting a date in the future when this policy needs to be reviewed. And once you've done that, you can then start doing things like using views in Microsoft to see upcoming policies, and also email notifications that go to those users. So first thing we're going to do, if you click on the view drop down a minute, we've got a view that we've created called due in 30 days. So if we click on that, we've filtered all of the policies that are either overdue or will be due within the next 30 days. And we can see that there's this disciplinary policy that we just saw, which is already overdue. And we can see that there's this health policy, which is going to be due in about a week's time or so. Okay, so that's the first thing we can do, is use views to achieve this. But then because we're using Power Automate as well, we can start sending out reminders to users as it approaches that date.
So here's
so if
one
we click
I
on
have
this
earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an owner of a policy, I've received a nice and clean email that says, I've got some policies that are due for review. Here's a list of policies. It's just one in my case. If I was an owner of multiple policies and they were all due, I wouldn't receive multiple emails. I'd receive a single email that just gives me a summary list of all of the policies that are due.
Okay, so that's interesting. So that's taking me straight to that document, so I can then look at that review date and open it, and obviously, if it's good to go, I can click on it and start that approval process.
Exactly.
So I think that covers the review process, Ben. So what you've touched on there is ownership of a document is important because we need to tell somebody that it's their document's review. In terms of timescales, let's tell people before it's due for review. So normally we look at maybe 90 or 60 days out for a first email, then build a cadence up towards the due date, and then following the due date, weekly reminders. But it might be that it's not time which triggers that review, but it's the feedback which triggers that review, with someone saying, actually, this is incorrect, we need to fix it. And then when you go through that approval process again, and again, push out the review date. One thing that I did want to touch on there, which I didn't touch on earlier, is a bit of public accountability here. So when some policy doesn't get reviewed in time, what we've done here is actually made an adjustment to the search filter. And as you can see here, we've got this expiry date popping up here. So that might encourage the person who owns this policy to get on and review it. Now, Ben, we've gone through the process. Obviously, we also have this perspective of the policy administrator, the someone who sits over the top. What can we do for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done is we've created a dashboard within Power BI. So again, because all of this information is in SharePoint, we can access it and create reports on it. So Rupert's just gone and clicked onto our dashboard page where we've embedded a Power BI report into that page. So give it a second to load.
Okay.
So what this is giving us is a summary, a kind of bird's eye view, sort of top-down view of everything that's going on within the policy system. We've got some high-level KPIs. We can see how many published documents there are. We can see how many documents there are within the document masters there. And interestingly, there's more in masters than published because we've still got some draft documents. We can see that there's some documents that are waiting for acknowledgement. Their acknowledgements haven't completed. And interestingly, we can see that there are 7 documents who don't have a valid owner that we need to look at in a second. Now, because this is Power BI, we can actually interact with this report to then do drill through and things. So perhaps, let's say we want to go and click into how many documents are owned by the HR team. Why don't we click on that filter or that pie chart, sorry, within that's it. Good. So we can see as we click on the HR section of that pie chart, all of the other numbers have been updated accordingly. This is just Power BI doing its thing. We can even right-click onto that selection that we did and do some drill through. So if you want to see what the actual details are, we can go in and see those published documents. So we can see this is the list of published HR documents. And in fact, you can see that disciplinary policy that we talked about earlier, we've got our reminder on, we can see it's got that status of overdue. So by creating this all up dashboard that's looking at the metadata of the SharePoint list, of the SharePoint document libraries, it's looking at the acknowledgements list, it's looking at the feedback, it's pulling all of this stuff together. I think it is just worth taking a look at that orphaned policies or orphaned documents concept. So if you could click on that tab a minute. What we can see here is a list of documents whose owner, either those documents never had an owner assigned to it for whatever reason, or they did have an owner, but that owner has left the organization. So how do we know they've left? Well, typically what will happen within Microsoft 365 is that when someone leaves an organization, the IT department will go and block the sign-in for that user. They may not delete the user, but they're blocked from signing in. So we can see that within this list that the owner has been deactivated. They're no longer active, which is a very good indication that they've left the organization. The way we do this is, again, using Power Automate. We're checking for all of the owners, and we're just talking back to Microsoft 365 and saying, give me the details. Have they got licenses? What's their sign-in status, etc. And then we can build this report accordingly.
Okay, Ben, that's useful. I think a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that SharePoint and Power BI can talk directly to each other. So you can create reports based on SharePoint data, which is what we've done there. There's no sort of SQL servers behind the scenes. So that monitor piece really is that overarching view, helping people manage by exception. And some of those exceptions we saw were policies which were overdue or orphan policies. Then I think that brings us to a close on the demos. And anything you'd like to touch on here in the policy lifecycle? Obviously, we've gone through end to end. But otherwise, we've gone through the circle and showed hopefully an awful lot of features to give people a load of ideas of how policy management can come to life within SharePoint. I think, you know, the key thing when I speak to people about SharePoint using it as a tool, if you're already using it as your tool for your intranet, for your other document management, then it makes sense that that's the place where you put policies. So when you do a search, it's including that information. You don't have to go off to a separate system. And it's a system that people are getting more and more familiar with, you know, as it's baked to Office 365. Now, that might give you inspiration to go off and do it yourself. If you're looking for some help on how to do that, then that's certainly something that we can do. So we have a solution called Policy Express, which is what we've based this webinar on. If you'd like to find out more about that, you can jump on our website. You can click on that link there, and also on pricing on the top right, you'll see how much it costs. So there's no secrets, all out in the open. If you'd like a chat with me, you can also click on the book a discovery call. That will go straight into my diary. What I typically do is understand what you're trying to achieve. We'll dive into a few questions, maybe do a bit of screen sharing. And then I'll talk about our approach of how we might be to solve your problem, if that feels like something that we can do, and also the typical investment budget as well. So that's what normally happens on a discovery call, to give you the information to think of, well, are we a fit? And B, can we solve it in a way that makes sense to both parties? So I hope that was useful. Love to have a chat with you. But Ben, thank you again for your insight and genius into the world of policy management. And if you have watched this and would like to join us for a future webinar, keep a track on our LinkedIn page where we publish them first. But Ben, thank you. And
Cheers, Rupert.
we'll call it a wrap.
Cheerio.